We're just about to go live. Okay, I think we're live. Good evening, Portsmouth. It's March 16th, a little bit after 6:30, and this is an informational meeting of the Parking, Traffic, and Safety Committee on the neighborhood parking program trial that we've been running in the Islington Creek neighborhood. Mr. Fletcher, do you want to give the presentation?
Certainly. Whoa, that's a very excellent microphone. So let me share my screen real quick. Okay. All right. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the 7-month results of the Islington Creek Neighborhood Parking Program pilot launched on August 4th, 2021. While we did a mid-pilot presentation at the PTS meeting on November 16th, it's been our intention, of course, to schedule tonight's meeting to discuss the pilot's relevant data covering its initial designated lifespan. The presentation on the 16th was inclusive of data through the end of October. For tonight's presentation, I've added data through February 28th for additional context. To establish indicators of success, aside from anecdotal data, which is important, there are two primary indicators as to whether the Islington Creek NPP has had its intended effect of reducing demand measured by parking occupancy in the neighborhood, which in layman's terms manifests itself as additional available parking inventory when desired. The first such measure consists of determining whether or not demand figures are indeed reduced as a direct result of the program, given positive evidence to the first. The second measure would be an indication of where that displaced demand, now ineligible vehicle users, would then choose to engage in their parking. This is measured by looking at the demand in the immediately adjacent parking alternatives, again measured as parking occupancy in those areas, whether they're monetized or not. This evening's...
Ben, pardon me, you have to speak a lot louder. People are having trouble hearing.
Oh, okay. I thought I was being too loud. Sorry.
No, you're not being too loud.
I'll bring this. I was trying to tone my voice down. I know I'm loud, so I'm trying not to be so loud. This evening's presentation seeks to clarify any shifts or changes in demand in both the NPP designated area and its surrounding immediate parking alternatives. So as expected, the NPP program has seen strong participation. Recall that the current iteration of the program allows for up to 3 permits per household, which must be attributed to a particular vehicle, and 1 transferable guest permit. Additionally, the residents in other areas of Portsmouth are eligible for 1 permit, which also must be attributable to a particular vehicle. So since its launch on August 4th, the program has seen 422 regular passes issued, 369 within the neighborhood, and 53 from elsewhere in Portsmouth. Additionally, there are 218 guest permits in circulation. So this amounts to 640 overall passes, equating to 255% of the 251 space availability of parking inventory in the neighborhood. So the neighborhood itself, without outside influence, is what we would call upside down in terms of demand versus supply. Of all the issues brought forward since the discussion began in earnest in 2017, the most common was the belief that it was downtown employees of Portsmouth businesses that were creating issues by parking in the target neighborhood and walking into town to work their shifts. In 2017, I personally observed this to be the case. Since that time, though, consistent with the 2012 parking principles, available public inventory was increased when the construction of the Foundry Garage was completed, opening in October 2018, and subsequently the downtown employee parking program was introduced, providing for a 70% discount off the Foundry hourly rate of $1 per hour for employees of downtown Portsmouth businesses. So as we emerged from COVID, a more positive outlook had businesses reopening for the 2021 tourism season, which made for a more normal summer hiring session. So between spring 2021 and August 3rd, the day before the program launched, the downtown employee program saw a 202% increase in participation. So this graph seeks to show the relationship between increased sales in the downtown employee program particularly in the spring and summer of 2021, and any related reduction in occupancy in the NPP neighborhood. One citizen did opine that employees may have jumped into the program at that rate in anticipation of the launch of the program, where you would then expect to see a likewise reduction in occupancy percentages seen in the target neighborhood during the same time. In other words, if new participants of the downtown program had previously been parking in the NPP neighborhood, we should have seen a drop in the neighborhood occupancy rates as participation in the employee program increased. However, the neighborhood occupancy rates did not reflect the trend, remaining in the high 60 to low 70 range shown in the red square at the top of the graph. It's also important to note that the increased employee participation did coincide with the normal increase in hiring historically seen at the inception of the tourism season in previous years. And finally, with a seasonal drop in participation in the downtown employee program shown in blue to the right of the graph, we have not seen higher occupancies return to the target neighborhood. All of this suggests that the downtown workforce is no longer a primary influence on availability of parking inventory in the target neighborhood prior to the launch of the program, nor is it now. So outside of downtown workers, it's possible that shoppers and out-of-town visitors might be engaged in using the target neighborhood out of previous habit. So it bears true that downtown shoppers, that downtown shoppers were parking in the NPP neighborhood, and a program such as NPP is developed and launched to discourage that practice, then another metric to consider would be any increased use of neighborhood-adjacent parking alternatives. The next two graphs highlight pre- and post-launch occupancy rates at both the Bridge Lot and Foundry Garage. So interestingly, the Bridge Lot transaction and peak occupancy figures held steady after the NPP pilot launched, initially dropping from 135% occupancy to 132%, and then seeing the typical shoulder season drop-off in demand in October, which mirrors what we've seen in the neighborhood and other rates around the city. Meanwhile, the Foundry Garage peak occupancies also held steady post-launch, remaining at 41%, even as the downtown employee program enjoyed strong participation throughout the summer. Additionally, Foundry has not seen the same shoulder season drop-off in occupancy that we've experienced in the NPP pilot area and throughout Portsmouth. This data, coupled with the average length of stay at Foundry of 8.43 hours, suggests that downtown employees are making use of the Foundry Garage in large numbers. It's also noteworthy that we have not experienced increased usage at the Masonic Lot located at the intersection of Miller and Middle, which is leased by the city to provide for additional inventory, nor have I been made aware that the division has received calls or complaints about rising occupancy rates in neighborhoods immediately adjacent to Islington Creek. So the division's been keeping regular morning, noon, and evening counts of the occupancy in the target neighborhood throughout this process. Throughout the summer of 2020, spring of 2021, and the pre-launch of summer 2021, those figures were consistently averaging in the high 60s to low 70s percentage-wise. Typically in the parking industry, occupancy rates of 85% or higher are when we begin to develop strategies to mitigate demand. This tile represents data from the first 3 months of the program before the shoulder season began, where we looked at occupancy figures as they compared to the previously recorded time period to get an understanding of any changes to occupancy that might be attributed to the program directly. Comparing post-launch August against summer of 2021, the neighborhood did see a 0.84% reduction in occupancy, equivalent to 2.11 spaces of inventory gained, which would be represented as spaces that are now open that were previously filled. As the program settled in and more users posted their passes in their vehicles, September showed an additional 2.32% reduction in demand when compared to August, equating to an additional 5.83 spaces gained. October versus September showed a 1.79% reduction, equating to additional 4.48 spaces. So through the first 3 months of the program prior to the start of the tourism shoulder season, where the entire city sees a drop-off, The neighborhood enjoyed a cumulative 4.95% reduction in occupancy, equivalent to 12.42 spaces gained of inventory. It's prudent to understand that the majority of these spaces were gained at the west end of the neighborhood, where streets on the east remained very tight, but now had populations of vehicles that bore the NPP credentials. So, excuse me. This tile graphically displays pre- and post-launch occupancy percentages just discussed. The biggest takeaway is that we did not see a precipitous drop in occupancy post-launch. As with all programs of this type, the largest impacts are generally seen early on, as the execution of the enforcement process encourages eligible users to do the legwork to participate in the program, and those not eligible are encouraged to seek alternatives. While we do see a fairly significant drop starting in late October and into the winter months, this is consistent with historic demand figures recorded in this neighborhood for the past several years. Citations. Through February 28th, a total of 442 citations have been issued, including 45 warning tickets early on and 397 two-hour violations. There are $4,885 in collections since the program's inception. The collections are not anticipated to be a major factor, and should the program proceed forward. So just to quickly summarize, we're in a situation where we have 255% issuance of passes versus spaces available, with a program that allows for 3 passes and 1 guest pass. This is indicative of an inherent supply and demand issue within the residential population before we consider outside factors such as shoppers or employees of downtown businesses. In an effort to alleviate outside demand, the city has built the Foundry Garage and offers greatly discounted parking to the city's downtown workforce. This program has seen a 202% increase during the summer of 2021 tourism ramp-up. We do believe this program has demonstrated to be a viable alternative solution to Portsmouth downtown workforce that might otherwise choose to utilize local neighborhoods for their parking needs. We saw a 4.95% total gained inventory in the first 3 months, which equates to 12.42 spaces gained. We did not see an increase in Foundry occupancy, nor did we see an increase in Bridge Lot occupancy, and no indication of increased demand at the Masonic Lot or surrounding residential neighborhoods. We have $4,885 in citation collections, and the current costs to date are $72,321.01. So, as mentioned, the costs to date are $72,321.01. This figure includes roughly $4,750 in startup costs for items such as signage, supplies, and installation, and $1,900 in additional early costs, include uniforms, citation supplies, office supplies. So these items have a shelf life, and they do represent costs we see, but they do not represent costs we see every month, rather once or twice a year. The remainder of the costs are operational, however, and they do recur at an average of $9,384 per month, each month of the program. So while eventually it was decided the pilot program would carry no fee for participation, a subject of great debate prior to the pilot's approval, centered around what the cost of an MPP parking pass would be if the program were moved forward permanently. So using the current figures, you have $119,000 in estimated costs for an annual program. You have citations roughly $5,000 annually, which leaves you with $114,000 in net costs annualized. There's presently 640 total passes at the current price of $0. Dividing the projected cost of $114,245 by 640 passes renders an annual break-even figure of $179 per pass per year. If a 15% reduction in participation rate can be assumed as a result of the city moving beyond its pilot price point of $0, the calculation would then equate to 544 passes in the program. This is just for example, which would suggest an annual break-even price point of $210 per pass. So at this point, this is where the program has brought us. So these are the results, and we're open for discussion at this point. I'm sure we've got a lot of folks on. We have 18 participants, so, and we've also got some folks here in the gallery that would probably want to speak. Councillor Bagley, I would think that you would want to, either call on the one or the other or both, or
Yeah, let's start with the
live.
people here in person,
Okay.
and then we'll call on the people on Zoom. So you want to approach the program podium, just your name and address, and then give us your thoughts, please.
Sure. Can you hear me through this all right?
Yes.
All right. My name is Liam Kenny. I live at 50 Cornwall Street. So I did want to speak out on the program and talk about some of the negatives about it. If this program were to continue, there are some changes that do need to be made. First off, there needs to be an expiration date on passes. So I'm only renting over there. Actually, this is Charlie, my landlord, and my lease is expiring at the end of the month. Upon moving in, the last people that lived there had passes, and they had fled to different states, and in order for me to get the pass, somehow I was responsible for tracking them down. So I think if someone presents a lease at the front, then you should almost have an expiration on the pass where this is a yearly thing, kind of like a registration sticker on a car. Next, the amount of passes given. So I know we're a unique circumstance, but there are 6 bedrooms in our house, leaving out with 6 of us. So we had to really fight to get enough passes just for us all to park in our own neighborhood. And we feel as though if we're paying rent, we should be allowed to have a car on that street. But not only that, almost all of us are students. I'm one of the few that isn't a student in the house. We have license plates from different states. So when we came to the parking office to try to get a pass, we showed the lease. But on top of the lease, you wanted a second form, like a piece of mail or anything like that. The bills are all in my name, so I had no problem picking up a pass. But my roommates, for example, all they have is a lease. A lease should suffice in order to get a parking pass. Lastly, I really want to talk about is the 72-hour parking window that you have in the city of Portsmouth. So I know right now the rule is if you're street parking, you're allowed to park for 3 days max. If you are in the parameters of the neighborhood parking program, you should not have to move your car. If there was a snowstorm, for example, earlier this year, so that was the only way they were able to tell, but my roommates didn't move their car for a few days and they got slapped with a $50 ticket on the window of a violation. We're in our own neighborhood. The point of this program is to protect the residents that are living there, not target them. So if we are in this bubble, there needs to be an exception. Now, I know this 72-hour rule has been in place in Portsmouth for many years, but I think that's something that should be reconsidered if you are going to move forward with the program. Because if you are a resident, you have a resident sticker, why should I have to get in my car just to, say, back it up 10 feet into a different space every few days to make sure I'm not getting a ticket? From my understanding, the point of this program is to make sure you're keeping unwanted guests from parking in this area, so that way the residents all have spaces. And that's all I have.
Great. Thank you,
so
Liam.
much.
Is there anybody else in the room that would like to speak? Just feel free to approach the podium.
Robin Husledge, 27 Rock Street. Anecdotally, I have definitely noticed a huge improvement on Rock Street, and we're on, the eastern section, where it tends to have a lot of parking. I was hoping we get to see the survey results, but maybe that's later, because I want to learn more about the general public.
They're also posted online.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that.
Sure.
Part of the question that I have is, like he mentioned the snowstorm, I went to park in the parking garage, and I was in a long line that was hardly moving, and it turns out the parking garage foundry was full. And so there was no place, for people to park. They were just, one out, one in kind of situation. And then, so that is sort of like something, there's a lot of people that need parking. So the foundry garage, and I know it's been underutilized, but now it's being used more. And then soon we'll have those 69 or whatever parking spaces from Kim Rogers' development and all of that going in there. And then the 300 spaces from Hanover, when that gets renovated, is going to go in there. So I'm looking at the future and the pressure on Foundry. And what if, these downtown workers that enlist in the program go to park there, and because of all these other pressures, they can't find a spot? So I'm concerned about the very near future and what's going to happen when Foundry gets really tight, and where are the people going to go? They're going to go to our neighborhood if there isn't a program in place. So, thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And while the next speaker comes up, I will mention that the Foundry Garage typically fills up before High Hanover during snowstorms. So just a piece of information for people out there.
Mr. Chairman, before this gentleman speaks, Ben, could you pull up the results of the survey? So
Certainly.
before this meeting wraps, we could all hear that. Thank you.
Good evening, folks. My name is Randy Wright. I live on Sudbury Street. I don't know where you might not know where that is. Nobody does. But it's right in the middle of all of this. And I've been kind of like on the ground floor of this for about 30-something years. I've been lived in that neighborhood a long time. I've watched some big changes. And I love it there. We all are sitting on a fortune with our homes. You can imagine what I paid for my house in 1985. But then I'd just be a rich guy if I sold it with no place to go. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of nuts and bolts to this, and I have to thank all of you, especially Tom. I never could pronounce Tom's last name, Tom C. But
Cochiara.
Yeah.
But Tom, in his little yellow truck riding around with the light on, was just so focused and diligent, and took probably a lot of the energy away from the police force, so they didn't have to worry about this. But he was amazing, and you could be sure he gave the program credibility, because I don't know what all these figures mean, but I know this. There was a lot of people parking in my neighborhood for an awfully long time who didn't pay to park. And we should not have our tail between our legs considering all that. We have provided the worker from out of town in Portsmouth, the restaurateur from out of town, the tourists from out of town. We've provided them marvelous parking. We gave them a $27 million garage, and we're going to fix the other one up for them. So we have nothing to be ashamed of. But what I find that to be the most joyous thing about this program is we got our neighborhood back. We became a neighborhood again. We got people in our neighborhood who are moving into it, who are young or having babies. When I moved into that neighborhood, it was a pretty nasty place. But now we have kids going down the streets with their little plastic automated cars, which I would like to have one of those myself. And it's become a neighborhood again. The park is being utilized. People are out in the streets having coffee and talking because we don't have at 7:30, 8 o'clock. Just imagine where you live. And you got up in the morning and took your coffee and went out on the front porch of your house. And you're looking at your neighborhood. And within 20 minutes, 7:45, 8 o'clock, anywhere from 2 dozen to 5 dozen automobiles blast into your neighborhood, just descend down on it, screaming around looking for a place to park. The guy coming around the circle where the parking garage is looks over the gate, and don't ever move that gate. Looks over the gate and he sees a parking place. He screams down the road, goes around the block just so he can get that place. Once they get it, they park their cars, and those cars are there for 8 hours. And that, I think the point of the whole thing was to push people out of the neighborhoods and put them in the garage. If our biggest problem now is the garage is too full, well done. Thank you. Because now we justify the cost. But it's important that you understand the fact that we have a regular, normal, defined neighborhood again, where you don't have to worry about your animal getting run over or your kid getting run over, is a pretty nice thing. And I really appreciate, and I implore you, do not cancel this program. Because I think that if you really all, and I believe a lot of you believe it, this is going to be all over this town. Now, there's some bad things about it. We did push people into other people's neighborhoods, and I'm sorry about that. And there are some individuals who may have an address that doesn't qualify for the program, but they park around the corner where it is qualified. We need to fix these things, and we need to address these people. not give them the option where they don't want the program. They do want this program, and they don't know it maybe, but we do need it. And it's going to appear all over the city. And I can envision within the next 3 to 5 years, one gigantic downtown area that qualifies for parking. I just want the people who pay for this town to run to have a right to park in it, not a right to park in it because they don't live here in lieu of paying like everybody else does. Thank you again for everything you do. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Randy.
Good evening, Michelle Worth, 439 Hanover Street. I wanted to echo some of the things that this man said. It has been very, very inconvenient as a taxpayer in the city to not get the same benefit for my taxes that everyone else does and not be allowed to park in front of my own house. There are 4 drivers in my house. We have 6 cars. We don't have new cars. We have a couple of old cars. So I wasn't allowed to park 2 of my cars in my own neighborhood in front of my house. And that was ridiculous. I mean, so my church, Redemption Hill Church, asked me if I could host a Bible study every other week at my house. And I had to tell them no, I can't do that because I'm not allowed to have guests over my house other than once a month. I can't have people over my house for more than 2 hours. And that's ridiculous. The program's not appropriate to take away my rights to have people park in front of my house and have a Bible study at my house. That's ridiculous. My sons, I make them park over on State Street now, so they have to walk over there with their 2 cars. But let's just go back to the data. Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. At the beginning of this study, their data showed that we did not need a parking program. We didn't need it. We had, 65, 70% of the spaces filled. $72,000 later, we gained 12 spaces. So we paid $72,000 to gain 12 spaces. Is that really an appropriate way for the city to spend their money? I don't deny that there are places in the city that could benefit from such a program. I have a neighbor who lives on Gate Street, down near Marcy Street and Hancock Street, and I understand they have a real problem in July and August. That's a real situation. But our neighborhood has always had enough parking. It still has enough parking, and we do have the lovely Foundry Garage right in our neighborhood. Please don't burden us with extra fees. Please don't burden our city with extra fees to, in essence, just make life harder for some of us individuals and take away some of our rights in the city. Maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years from now, we'll talk about that again. But right now, it is not time for this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Good evening, Elizabeth Bratter, 159 McDonough Street, property owner. I've owned that house in McDonough Street before people wanted to live there at all. I bought that house in 1982, and there was no parking problem then. I can tell you that for sure. But when the building next to us started renting out to larger groups, we had a ballet studio next to us, yoga studios, Pilates studios, various larger groups, which came with 20 to 25 cars at a time. It filled up that end of the street quite readily and made it pretty much difficult to not able to park in front of your home or close to it. And at that time, I had 2 small children. My daughter lives in that house now, and she has teenagers, and they need cars, of course, because that's what teenagers want. And they need a place to park. And when you only allow 3 permits per residential unit, then that's where you run into a problem, because people like Michelle was talking about that I think she has teenagers too, and they have cars and they need a place to park. So I think residential people should be able to get as many as there are registered to their address. I agree with the 72-hour thing that this young man brought up. When my daughter goes on vacation, she parks her car at my house because I have space for it there. But if she doesn't have space for whatever reason, because something's going on, then we have to move her cars every 3 days. And it used to be, when I lived there for 35 years, if you went on vacation and the police came through and checked the neighborhood, which they did occasionally. We knew all the police officers who did our neighborhood, and we would say, oh, that's so-and-so's car, and they're on vacation. But that doesn't happen anymore because the people enforcing the parking are different than the local police that you all knew. Although we do know Mr. Chikari quite well, he just gives out the ticket whether he knows you or not. He plays no favoritism, I'll have you know. So for me, I think the parking program does need to be tweaked. I think it should include registers vehicles to that. I think in the case of tenants, you need to be aware that sometimes it's really that. We need to also be aware of the fact that the area on the other side, going in both directions, 105 Bartlett Street is going to have a massive increase, and they're going to be short parking, although they fit the requirements. If you look at West End Yards came to a meeting in November and said, quote, we don't have enough parking according to our management team for the 500 square foot micro apartments. We need one space for each one of them. We don't have enough parking for our 750 square foot micro apartments. We need 2 spaces for them. So they want to enlarge their parking lot, thankfully, because if they don't, they'll be rolling into that neighborhood. They want to enlarge their parking lot to accommodate those, as well as they want to put in more parking for one of the buildings that they had assessed at a lesser value. So that tells you that these micro apartments that are going in really need 1 space per unit. And if they're a 2-bedroom, they need 2 spaces. So we need to look at our parking assessment for what we're asking developers to do. When you have a commercial building that's commercial top to bottom, and they only have 18 spaces in it, but they're going to have 25 businesses in it, we might want to think about where are those people going to park. And they're going to want to park for free in the neighborhoods. And so far, we in the South End have been the neighborhood of choice because we're close to walk. But as we get full, and we got full, and that's why the program went into place, they pushed into other neighborhoods, or in this case, they pushed into the Foundry Garage because State Street was already full. So as a city, we really need to look at parking as more than just parking programs, because we do need them to protect neighborhoods such as the South End and Islington Creek. But we also need to look at how many parking spaces we're giving CUPs to, how many parking spaces per unit we're giving out for residential, the fact that we don't require any for commercial. We really need to look at that. And we also need to be aware of the fact that commercial spaces have parking, such as the Safeway storage area has a very nice parking lot, but they charge their tenants to park there, is my understanding. So they all park on the street, and they were very happy to be able to be part of the program with their 3 spaces, their 3 permits per business, because they needed those to be able to park, because otherwise they would have to pay for parking. So I think the residential parking should be free for residents, but businesses should pay a minimal fee, and anybody else should pay a little bit more than Foundry Garage to encourage people to use our public parking spaces that are paid. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Hi, I'm Charlie Moreno, and I'm the owner of the house at 50 Cornwall Street, and I've actually spoken at before your group before, and Ben Fletcher, we've had a number of conversations through the time with this, and I guess I just feel very contrary to some of the other opinions that have been stated. I don't really think that this is a necessary program, and I think it starts off with the bottom line of the numbers, of the figures. Early on, Ben told me that a normal parking occupancy threshold where there is a real problem is 85%, and as the numbers bear out, you're hovering around 69, 70%. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I just saw it in the presentation tonight. So Ben's nodding his head, yes. So you're like 15% below, or 15 percentage points below the threshold where you have a difficulty. And I have a feeling that this whole issue is very nuanced in that neighborhood. You might have areas like Hanover Street, you're closer to downtown, where parking is difficult. It doesn't seem like the program is even helping it that much, but okay. It'll continue to be difficult, but where we are in Cornwall Street, it never was a problem before the program, ever. And I've owned the house a long time, over 10 years. So, and it, you go there now and there's empty spaces, so it's not really making a change. On the other hand, so I guess the bottom line is that I don't feel that the program is necessary, and on the other hand, it does create difficulties and problems for the residents and for others, as Liam has spoken about, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Another thing that I think the program or anything like this does, and I think it's important for the city, I've been around this area for like close to 50 years, and this is important. It's the image that Portsmouth projects. This is a great town. It always has been. But as you know, we all say this, there's a lot of changes. I feel like something like this projects a negative image to visitors to the community. If you come in, you want to go to an event or do something, you by accident park in that spot and you get a big ticket, that's a big negative. Okay, maybe they deserve it because they shouldn't have been there. But say you come to a dinner party or you're gathering with friends, you get a ticket, you come out 2 hours later and you got a ticket on your door. It's just such a negative, and I think that Portsmouth needs to keep this in mind. I think it's important to be always a positive person, positive in life, positive as a community. That's important to project that image. I really want to kind of underscore that. So, and I'm not sure that this program is doing that for you at all. I know I get calls from my tenants where they're really upset about getting an unexpected ticket, or their friends did. It's just not good. And others have spoken about that tonight. Another thing that I want to point out is that the program is expensive to administer. From what I saw in the numbers there, $114,000 net costs are projected. And now there's a suggestion that the residents that purchase parking passes will be paying $200 or so per pass per year. I mean, I'll get back to that, but that really discriminates against people that can't afford that, especially young people. This town is aging, as many of the local communities are. You don't want to be doing this. So, I can think of so many positive alternatives for the money. You can fund the library, you can fund recreation programs. $114,000 is a lot of money. A lot of local towns would say that's a lot of money. And I want to say my favorite suggestion for this, $114,000 annually towards planting trees in this city. You need this badly. It'd be great for clean air, great for beautification of the town. It's just, again, a positive thing, rather than spending it on giving people parking tickets. Okay, please. So think of that. There may come a day when you do start to bump up neighborhood-wide to that 85% threshold, and then, yes, revisit it. And there are a lot of little problems floating around that need to be fixed. One of them we immediately ran into, as Liam had said, there are 6 persons living in the house. I feel like we provide affordable housing in the area. 25-year-olds, mid-20s, that's a very important demographic for a community. People in their 20s, early 30s. You don't want to be aging out here, and if they don't have housing opportunities because everything is so expensive, so you don't want to be discriminating. This program discriminates against people that are entering the workforce, they're students. These folks add a lot of vibrancy to this town, and they have since I was a young person that age as well. I was a big part of that in Portsmouth for many years ago. So let's see, what else? So, well, I think that's it. I want you to think about who this program might really, hurt. The young people like the person that said they had their Bible study, they can't hold that at their home anymore. It just, the problems it presents, I think, is really an important thing. If you want to have friends over for an evening now, where are they going to go park? So. Or an afternoon barbecue, where are they going to go park? So another thing I want to say, I'm going to be doing some extensive renovations on my house coming up soon. And right now, it's my understanding that I can the contractors can apply for a parking pass and take a space or two for free for a while the house is being renovated. And I think that's very important. You know, people want to make improvements to their house. You know, I'm going to be doing some new siding and windows. It's going to make my property look better and improve the neighborhood. Right now, it's by doing an application process, it sounds like we can do that without having further fees because all of this is so expensive nowadays. So I wanted to advocate for that, please. And one last thing, and this is really minimal. I've been able to get by this, but I am a homeowner. We pay taxes, yet we do not qualify for a parking pass because I don't actually live in the neighborhood. I've been able to get by. It's not the end of the world, but I find that ironic. You know, we do pay funds towards the city, so that might be a tweak. I wouldn't put that at the top of the list, but I guess I'll mention that as well. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else in the room that would like to speak? I think we could go to the people on Zoom, if there are any.
I know there are 14 participants on Zoom, Mr. Chairman, and perhaps now's the time to, for our producer, Kevin, to recognize any hands that get raised virtually. And also, perhaps while we wait, maybe Ben can work into the program the results of the survey. Does that make sense?
Certainly. I'd be happy to read these. So this has been a part of the program for a while now, and these are the results of the folks that have responded. So if you look at the first survey question 1, are you participating in the NPP? The answer is, of the respondents, the answer is overwhelmingly yes, they are respondents, users of the program. They're participating in the program in large part as a resident of the NPP neighborhood. A smaller amount, of course, residents outside the neighborhood and tenants and businesses at 7 and 10.8%, and then a small amount of other types of users that have responded to the survey. The approval is, it looks to be about a 60-30 split between whether they believe the program, of the survey takers believe that the program is working, 66% versus 33 versus the folks that felt that it has not been successful in its endeavor. The reasons that people might like the program, one of the clear, obvious reasons for having it is that they can find a space on the street when they need one. The top 2 answers also include allows me to have a guest when they want. 10% believe that the contractor pass program is effective, that Mr. Marino spoke to, and then whether it works for the tenants or employees. And then a percentage, 15% said that they did not have a reason why they liked the program, which I assume would feed them way into the reasons people don't like the program. So it looks like 18% felt that 3 permits plus a guest permit were not enough for the situation, for their particular situation. In particular, of that group, I believe it looks like 32% felt like they needed more guest permits, the contractor permit being too limited. Still see people parking in the neighborhood and walking downtown, and then no reason was 31% of the respondents that didn't like the program. How many permits did you receive? The number 1 result was 1 permit, so it looks like the majority of households, at least in this survey, had 1 permit, 31% had 2, 8.2% had 3, and then 14.6% had 4 or more. And then 7% had no permits in the program, which would make them not participants. So to make the program cost neutral, balancing the expense to administer and enforce the program with the revenue from permits issued, the annual fee of $225 revised tonight to roughly $220. would be required if the program were continued, were to continue, how much you would be willing to pay. So 24.7% of the respondents felt that 100% would be viable and feasible, 1.9% at 200, 5.1% at 225, and 68.4% at other. As I understand, a large portion of those were zero in their opinion of how much should be paid for a permit. Question 8, should there be different permit prices for those with driveways or those without? It looks like the majority answer is no, the permit should be priced the same. Question 9, should there be different permit prices for tenants versus employees? Again, almost the same result, that prices should be the same for property owners or employees or tenants. And I believe this is the final question. Should Islington Creek neighborhood be made permanent? It looks like 45.6% of the respondents believed it should, 33.5% believed it should not, and 20.9% did not apparently have an opinion on whether to continue.
Can I speak to the survey? If it comes out.
Certainly.
You come up to the microphone, please.
Again, Michelle Worth, 439 Hanover Street. I got a link to this survey in my inbox, and I didn't deal with it the next day. I opened up the survey, I got to question 4, and I had to answer why I liked the program. Well, I don't like the program. So I skipped question 4 and went on to 5, 6, 7, 8. And when I click submit, I'm not allowed to submit unless I answer question 4. Unless I say I like the program, I was not allowed to submit the survey. And that was ridiculous. Of course, I X'd out of the program and stormed away. A few hours later, I took a breath and said, nope, how many people in my neighborhood did that same thing? They X'd the survey and they stormed away because you weren't allowed to say no. I called Mr. Fletcher. He got back to me the very next day. He was gracious, he was polite, recognized the problem, and he fixed it. He put a none of the above option on question 4. So from that point later, 48, 72 hours later, people were allowed to choose no, and they were allowed to submit the survey. How many people like me tried to submit the survey, realized they weren't allowed to say no, and just X'd out of it and never went back? So as far as the accuracy, as far as who likes the program and who doesn't, I would submit that this survey is not accurate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good point. Null and void.
And now
It's good to hear that.
can we get to the people on Zoom first and then ask your question? I know they've been waiting a while to speak. I think we have 3 speakers.
We do. First is Nicole Lapierre.
Nicole Lapierre, could you?
Hi, Nicole Lapierre, 44 Rock Street. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. Okay, so just a quick note to the landlord, Charlie. In the pilot program, any resident of Portsmouth was eligible to get a sticker if they went to the parking garage and showed that they were a resident of Portsmouth. So it was not limited just to our neighborhood. As a side note, I don't know if you live in the city, but if you do, you would have been able to get one. And to Liam's points, when you do have a situation with a landlord, and this is a mixed-use neighborhood, there's single-family homes, multi-family homes, all sorts of kind of living units. I think that instead of a sticker, having a hanging sign you attach to your mirror would be much easier and could be turned in or maybe even returned to the landlord, and the landlord could reissue it to whoever maybe is subleasing that person's spot. And I also agree with people that say people should be allowed to have more spaces. So like Michelle, if you own 6 cars, which is not the norm, I mean, it's fine if people have different things they like. And if you like cars and if you have 6 cars and they're registered to a resident of the neighborhood, yes, why shouldn't you be able to have those extra passes? Because if we gain spots, that would allow those people that do need extra spots to use those spots for their vehicles. So the way I see it, and I've been following this a good decade, is that we absolutely had a problem and you have solved the problem. So I really don't want to turn back hands of time and end up right back where we were, because to mirror Robin's statement, there are continued massive amounts of development in our surrounding area, and within our neighborhood, there's even more houses going up. So the problem is only going to get worse, and if you take away the parking program, then the previous problem we had is going to be an even bigger problem, and we will be, on my life, we will be right back where we are now. So regarding having friends over and parties or whatever, etc., Portsmouth is a city now, and it's become a much busier place in the almost 20 years I've lived here. It's just the reality, and I feel like for some people, there's this continued sense of denial about the development we live in and will continue to live with. It just is. We are a busy city now, and busy cities require parking programs. I also agree with Randy that it does feel again more like a neighborhood and not a race to park, because on the off days that I was home during the day, I mean, just watching people compete for spots on Hanover early in the morning before work would make your head spin. So I think really the next step is not ending the program, but rather dealing with the cost of it in an equitable and reasonable way. I don't see the issue being having a program anymore. The issue now is to move on to dealing with costs. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you listening.
Thank you, Nicole.
So the next person with their hand up is Brittany Wason or Wason. Forgive me if I've mispronounced your name.
Hi, Brittany Wasson. I live at 314 Hanover. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome, wonderful. So I live at Hanover between Bridge and Pearl, so that very first block of this program. I work at a nonprofit downtown. I walk into town. I'm very thankful for this opportunity to have that ability, and very lucky to have grown up and live in Portsmouth still. I have had a lot of trouble with this program. I have not seen any more spots available. I am still rushing to find a spot on the street. My roommate, who was the only one eligible to apply for the permit program in our household, we live in a 3-unit apartment building, had to provide 4 pieces of evidence that she lives here. Thank God the bills are in her name and that she has everything registered appropriately. The parking attendant who gave her the permit said that they were treated like gold, and she hoped that she was issuing them correctly. And it took months to get these pieces of information in place. I felt like that we were extremely limited in that, and we were struggling, and I got ticketed, and it felt very limiting. And I think if this program is to continue, that accessibility and affordability are appropriate here. The city talks so much about how it's unaffordable to live here, about how rent is going up, how there's no parking, and that there's nobody who wants to work downtown anymore. And I don't think this is helping the issue. I think that a lot of things can be relaxed. I think a lease should be sufficient, or a mortgage, and not registration, license, bills, and all of that. It shouldn't require 4 pieces of proof. And I know that wasn't actually on the list when we filled out the application, but that's what it ended up being day of. I, again, have not seen any difference. We're still hunting for parking, and to still have the right to hunt for parking doesn't seem to be fulfilling the problem of it. To some earlier points, I think that it seems more like a neighborhood because this program was voted into place in 2018, correct? And we have had a pandemic since then. I think a lot more people are going outside and walking and moving into the neighborhood. So I don't know how much of that is anecdotal or how much of it is related to a pandemic. The hours of operations are extremely restricting. I think waiting until 8 p.m. to find parking is ridiculous. And I'm truly thankful for this attempt, and I majoritively feel that it is unnecessary. But I'm thankful for everybody who's trying to make it work and for everyone speaking tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany.
And the last person with their hand raised is Iris Esterbrook.
Okay, unmuted. Hi, I live at 198 Islington Street, and also we were one of the last pieces of the neighborhood added to the program, and I want to again thank you all for doing that. But we've run into a lot of the same problems that others have around the issues of having more than one person over at the same time and other inconveniences of the program. We also ran into a glitch that I don't think anybody else has spoken to yet. We are retired folks who split our time and live part-time in Portsmouth with driver's licenses elsewhere. And so in order to get my permit, I had to go and talk with the person on duty who was very helpful and understood that my property tax bill showed that I paid full property taxes in Portsmouth, and my other bills showed our continued residence there, and I got my permit. My husband, on the other hand, was given a very hard time when presenting the same documentation. So I think the rules need, if the program goes forward, the rules need to be clarified so that a property taxpayer owner of a property in the neighborhood who pays full taxes has at least the same rights as someone renting in the neighborhood. I thought that was a little absurd that didn't get included in the original rules. The other thing that's concerning me as I'm listening to this is there seems to be very little benefit gained from the expense, and that if the program does go forward, that expense is going to be borne by the people who are required to buy permits if they want to continue to park in their own neighborhood. And from what I'm hearing, that cost is going to be in the neighborhood of $200 per permit. So that means that even in a family where there are only 2 cars and you want a guest permit, you're going to be paying $600 a year on top of your property taxes for the privilege of parking in your own neighborhood. It seems that the benefits certainly do not exceed the detrimental effects of this program. And so I hope that the committee will recommend to the council that the program no longer be continued. I think it was a noble effort, and it was great to see that the statistics, showed that the program isn't necessary, and to hear from the people who were severely inconvenienced by it. So thank you very much for the effort, and please take note of that glitch in the rules. Thanks.
Thank you, Iris.
That's the last one that we have with their hand raised in the Zoom pool.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Is there anybody else in the room that would like to speak again? And I appreciate your patience.
I just had a quick question on the survey data. I think it required you to put in your address. Did you look at the data results based on where people lived to see, like, maybe closer to downtown, people were more in favor of it because it really helped them, whereas people further away to the west were less favorable because it was more of an inconvenience, wasn't, worth it for them? I was just curious as to whether you looked at the data based on where people lived.
So the data that we showed tonight is basically participant in the neighborhood versus non-neighborhood participant. I can certainly see if there's a way for us to check into that and see if the greater degree of folks on the east end were in favor of it as opposed to the west end.
Yeah, I just thought if there is a benefit, a large benefit maybe for a certain part of the neighborhood, but people that aren't as impacted by the lack of parking, it would just be an inconvenience for them. So I was just, and maybe if you were looking at the program and thinking, well, is it a go or a not, that maybe you could explore, well, maybe it's a go, but in this smaller section of town. Just a thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak?
Good evening, Dave Rayom. I live at 81 Langdon Street, which is within the neighborhood parking zone. I think by and large, this is probably going to come down to a dollars and cents comparison, as a couple of the folks have said. It really is value versus cost that's being put into it. Many of the other complaints that folks have had, I think a lot of them can be resolved with some changes to the program. I think they're valid concerns, but I think that they are ultimately solvable problems. The question is this a value to the city and to the neighborhood that is worth making the investment into? And I guess towards that end, I would hope that the Parking and Traffic Safety Commission would take a look and challenge the city to do like a pretty detailed analysis of the costs of the program and understand like timeframes, like how often were we sending folks around. I'm presuming labor costs are probably one of the larger considerations. So how often did we send people through the neighborhood to look for non-compliant vehicles, and what was the return rate on it? I.e., is there any time in particular that we were finding a higher number of vehicles that were not in compliance with the neighborhood parking program that could maybe allow us to streamline it and still get most of the benefit from it at ideally it would be a significantly reduced cost. And then in terms of, I know ultimately there's a perception that it's a neighborhood desired program, so therefore the neighborhood should be the only ones that are, perhaps charged for it. But I would also challenge the committee to just think a little bit more broadly, and that many of these parking issues, and I know that some of the statistics may not bear it out, but I do agree with a lot of the concerns that continued development, and we know there's going to be a new office building that's going to be located right on Hanover Street. That's going to have a lot of number of folks there. Some other new businesses in the downtown area that aren't required to have parking. So what is the future projection for the needs for the parking garage, both parking garages, one of which it's a temporary inconvenience, but over the course of the next several years is going to be losing some of its parking spots. Just making sure that we're making a full detailed analysis of what the future looks like. As has been pointed out, much of this pilot program did take place during a pandemic timeframe. Some of the data could be skewed by that fact, so just trying to make sure that we're looking at all those details. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.
So I can provide an answer to one of his questions, and that's every 2 hours. We ran our enforcement staff through every 2 hours because there's a 2-hour limit on the available parking for non-NPP participants. So there's that. We can obviously look up the rest. So.
Okay, well, I guess I want to thank everybody for coming out and speaking tonight or speaking on Zoom, in addition to the people that called me or sent in emails. As everybody here knows, there's lots of opinions on this, so it's always helpful to get as much data and opinions about a program like this so we know what the next steps are.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think it would be appropriate for the April Parking and Traffic Safety Committee meeting to take this up, given that the City Council has given us a charge to the beginning of April. So I would imagine it could be on the agenda for the April PTS meeting to then go forward to the council at their second April meeting with a recommendation.
Thank you. I think that's a good suggestion. We're not going to take any action tonight. It was just a chance to hear your feedback, and then we're going to analyze your feedback and then come up with suggestions for the April Parking and Traffic Safety meeting. Those happen at 8:30 in the morning. The reason we had this at night was to give the people that can't speak at 8:30 in the morning a chance to participate. But if you want to participate in that meeting as well, do you know the date offhand?
I believe it's April 7th, and there will be a Zoom component. So if you're able to be there in person, great. And if you would wish to participate remotely, that's fine as well.
That's correct. If please, the chair, I've got one okay. I had one more raised hand, but it's not raised any longer, so all right then.
All right. Well, I guess just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and we'll see you in April.
Thank you.